Ethan Walker wasn't the kind of man who smiled often anymore. Once, he was known as the visionary mind behind one of Boston's most promising medical technology companies. He graced magazines, shook hands with governors, spoke at conferences about the intersection of innovation and care. But behind the polished boardroom charm was a man hollowed out by something no accolade could touch. 5 years ago, in a hospital room filled with sterile light, his wife Rachel died giving birth to their daughter. Since then, Ethan's world had become a monument to silence. He lived in a penthouse that looked like it belonged in a design catalog. Sleek furniture, abstract art, minimal color. Everything was placed just so, but it was quiet. Too quiet. A cold kind of quiet that seeped into the bones of the place and refused to leave. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of presence, of warmth, of laughter. Emma, his daughter, was 4 now. She had Rachel's golden curls and his serious eyes. She rarely smiled for photos. She didn't cry much either. She learned early on not to expect anyone to stay long. Most of the people who came into her life, nannies, therapists, tutors, left within weeks. Ethan had hired 6 in the past year alone. None of them passed the invisible test he'd never admitted he was giving. They weren't Rachel. He wasn't a cruel man, just unreachable. His days were strict routines: up before dawn, gym, office, meetings, reports, home long after Emma had gone to bed. Even when they were in the same room, they weren't truly together. He avoided the nursery where Rachel once sat reading to the baby bump, avoided the family photo Rachel framed before the birth, avoided Emma's eyes when they looked too much like her mother's. Only one person ever dared to challenge him: Clara Simmons, his assistant for over a decade. She had stayed long after others burned out, not because she needed the job, but because she remembered the man Ethan used to be. She had been there when he danced in the hallway after securing his first investor. She had held back tears during Rachel's funeral, and then again every time she saw Ethan come back from work, more detached than the day before. "Ethan," she said gently one afternoon, placing a folder on his desk, "Emma needs someone consistent, someone human." "I've hired plenty of people," he replied without looking up. "Not like that. I mean someone she can actually connect to. Someone who doesn't treat her like a job description." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then you hire them. I'm done with interviews." She nodded once. She'd expected that answer. "Fine, but if she doesn't like them, they go. Her comfort comes first." "Of course," he said, already turning his attention back to the financial report on his screen. And so, while Ethan boarded a flight to Zurich for a 2-week conference, Clara quietly scanned resumes and background checks, interviewed candidates over coffee, and finally, almost by instinct more than strategy, chose a woman named Lucy Hart. There was something about Lucy's application that stood out, not just the solid references or years of experience in pediatric care, but something between the lines. She had once been a pediatric nurse, left the hospital field 3 years ago. No big explanation, just life. She'd written in the last paragraph, looking for something slower, something that breathes. Clara called her in the next morning. "I'm not promising you anything," Clara had warned. "Emma is complex. She doesn't open up easily. And this home, this isn't a warm place." Lucy only nodded, her tone calm. "That's all right. I don't rush children or homes." There was no false charm in her voice, no eagerness to impress, just honesty. And sometimes, Clara knew, that was the only thing that could reach a broken space. Someone who didn't come to fix it, but to simply sit with it. Lucy Hart arrived on a quiet Monday morning with nothing more than a worn canvas backpack and a look in her eyes that Clara couldn't quite name. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was hope. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled into a simple bun. Her shoes had scuffs on the sides, and her coat had a missing button near the hem. But there was something grounded about her, like she had walked through storms and learned not to flinch when the thunder rolled. Clara greeted her in the entryway of the penthouse, her expression as reserved as always. "The house is quiet," she said, leading Lucy through the living room. "Very quiet." Lucy nodded, eyes sweeping the space. The apartment was beautiful, expensive, elegant, but lifeless. Large windows let in the Boston light, but the walls held no color. The stairway curved upward like a sculpture. Every piece of furniture was curated. Perfect. Cold. There were picture frames on a side table, photos of a smiling woman with light in her eyes. Rachel, no doubt, but none of Ethan, none of Emma. "She's 4, Clara continued, pausing at the bottom of the stairs. "She doesn't like loud voices, doesn't like too many questions, but she's sweet, if you can reach her." Lucy didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "I don't usually rush these things." That was what convinced Clara. Not the resume, not the credentials, just that simple, steady sentence, said without pretense. It wasn't a line meant to impress. It was a truth. Emma was upstairs when Lucy arrived, sitting on the floor with a picture book open on her lap. She didn't look up right away when Lucy entered, just turned a page slowly, like she was alone. Lucy crouched a few feet away. "Hi, Emma," she said gently. "Mind if I sit with you?" The girl glanced at her, expression unreadable. She didn't speak, but after a long pause, she shrugged and patted the space beside her. Lucy sat down. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to make jokes or compliment Emma's dress or talk about the weather. She simply read the title of the book aloud, Whales of the Deep Blue, and let the silence stretch between them like a thread slowly tightening. For the next 10 minutes, they shared the space, quietly, naturally. Lucy let Emma turn the pages. She read 1 or 2 lines in a low voice. Emma didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. Her little shoulder leaned, just slightly, toward Lucy's. Clara stood at the door, watching, holding her breath. That was how it began. In the days that followed, Lucy moved through the house without forcing anything. She didn't try to win Ethan over. He was still in Zurich, unreachable by anything other than occasional texts. She didn't insert herself into the kitchen Ethan rarely used or the study, where Rachel's books still lined the shelves. She kept to the edges, respected the ghosts. She cooked simple meals, learned Emma's bedtime routine, and matched her pace with care. Emma responded in her own quiet ways. She stopped hiding behind the couch when new voices came in the door. She began humming softly at breakfast. Once, she asked Lucy if whales could dream. Clara noticed the difference immediately, the way Emma's eyes followed Lucy when she left the room, the way she clutched the edge of Lucy's cardigan when they read before bed. One afternoon, while waiting on a grocery delivery, Clara joined Lucy in the kitchen. Rain tapped gently on the window. Lucy was stirring tea with both hands wrapped around the mug. "You know what I thought when I read your file?" Clara said casually. "You were too qualified to be a nanny. So why take the job?" Lucy didn't look up right away. When she did, her voice was even. "Because it's the first place in a long time where I can breathe." Clara studied her for a moment. There was no performance in her answer, no practiced charm. "Either isn't easy," Clara warned softly. "And this house isn't either." "I'm not here to fill a void," Lucy said. "I just want to care for Emma, that's all." Clara gave a small nod, but something in her chest stirred. A quiet certainty. Lucy had no idea how deeply her presence was already shifting the air in that home. And across the ocean, in a Zurich hotel suite filled with numbers and noise, Ethan Walker had no idea that something as simple as a child's laugh and the woman behind it was about to change everything. Ethan Walker returned home 3 days earlier than planned. The final meeting in Zurich had been canceled at the last minute, and rather than extend his stay or take a detour to Geneva like his assistant suggested, he booked the next flight back to Boston. He didn't tell Clara. He didn't notify anyone. There was no real reason. Or maybe there was, and it was simply harder to admit. The truth was, something about the last few days had left him restless. Clara's messages from home, which usually focused on Emma's meals and nap schedules, had taken on a different tone. Emma ate everything today, asked for seconds. Lucy made her homemade chicken soup. Abel spent almost an hour drawing on the living room rug. She smiled a lot. Emma fell asleep in Lucy's lap, no tears. Ethan read each message slowly, more than once, and each time he felt something he couldn't name take root just beneath his ribs. The car dropped him off just before noon. He carried only a small bag over his shoulder and expected, as always, to return to a house heavy with silence. But when he stepped inside, the first thing he heard was laughter. Soft, bright, familiar, yet almost foreign in that space. He froze near the entrance, suitcase straps slipping down his arm. The sound was coming from the open concept kitchen. He followed it, quietly, almost cautiously. And there they were. Emma sat on the marble counter, legs swinging, face streaked with chocolate. Her apron was several sizes too big and covered in flour. Lucy stood beside her, wielding a spatula like a wand, her hair tied back in a messy knot and a smear of batter on her cheek. They were failing, to make cupcakes. And it didn't matter. Too much milk? Emma giggled. If we add more flour, it becomes dough again, Lucy replied, pretending to panic. If not, soup cake. Emma shrieked with laughter. Ethan didn't move. He just watched the scene unfold like a memory he never lived. There was no music, no perfect lighting, just flour in the air, joy in the room, and the feeling, undeniable, that something inside him had shifted. Lucy turned suddenly, catching his presence. Their eyes met over the top of Emma's head. She didn't gasp or drop the bowl. She didn't stumble over apologies. Her surprise was quiet, contained. "Mr. Walker," she said, "steady. We didn't know you'd be back today." He forced a smile, reaching for his phone. "The last meeting was canceled. I decided to fly home." Emma turned immediately. "Daddy, look at our cake." He stepped forward, crouching to wipe chocolate off her nose with his thumb. "You look like a professional pastry chef." Lucy had already turned to wash her hands at the sink. She didn't intrude on the moment, but Ethan's eyes found her again, watching her from the corner of the kitchen like something in him refused to look away. Later that day, he tried to retreat into old patterns. He climbed the stairs to his office, told himself he had emails to answer, calls to return. But the laughter downstairs echoed in his head. So did the sight of Emma, relaxed and radiant, and the woman who made it possible. At dinner, he found them at the table. There was roasted fish, a small candle, and the faint scent of lemon and garlic in the air. Simple, homey. Lucy looked up only briefly. "I made sure your plate has no cilantro." He blinked. "I never mentioned that." "Clara did. I figured it was safer not to risk it." It was such a small thing, a meaningless detail. But in this house, this place still full of Rachel's shadow and Ethan's regrets, it was everything. A detail that made space for someone living. That night, after Lucy had read Emma to sleep and the house quieted again, Ethan wandered through each room like a man stepping into familiar territory with new eyes. In the kitchen, he found flour still on the floor. In the living room, a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. One small, one with long hair, and one with a tie. He stared at it for a long time until his vision blurred. And for the first time in years, he led the missing ache. Not just for Rachel, but for the version of himself that had once believed love was still possible. It was just past 1 a.m. when Ethan wandered down the stairs, his mind too loud for sleep. The house, as always, was silent, except for the faintest rustle of pages turning. In the living room, dimly lit by the soft glow of a side lamp, Lucy sat curled on the end of the couch, a blanket pulled around her legs, a book resting open but untouched in her lap. She looked up as he entered, not startled, not awkward, just aware. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head and settled into the armchair across from her. Not even close. They sat like that for a while, neither of them saying much. The silence between them didn't feel heavy, just real. Ethan stared at the shadows stretching across the hardwood floor, then finally said, "Do you ever feel like grief gets louder at night?" Lucy didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady. It's when everything else finally quiets down that it decides to speak. He glanced at her, surprised by how accurate it felt. "It's been 5 years," he murmured, "since Rachel died. And some nights, it still feels like I'm waiting for her to walk through the door." Lucy's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. "I used to be a nurse," she said suddenly. Ethan turned toward her. "I didn't know that. Pediatric, 3 years at a children's hospital. What made you leave?" There was a pause. Then she looked down at her hands, fingers tracing the spine of the book. "One day, a little boy died in my arms. He had leukemia. We did everything we could, but it wasn't enough. And I knew that, but when he stopped breathing, it didn't feel clinical. It felt personal, like a piece of me went with him." Ethan didn't move. "I went back to work the next week," she continued, "but I couldn't walk into a patient's room without flinching. I started keeping distance, smiling less, disconnecting, and that wasn't fair to the kids, or to me." He nodded slowly. "So you left?" She nodded. "I thought maybe if I worked with children in a different way, it would be easier. But easier isn't the right word. It's just different." Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, unspoken but deeply understood. Two people who had once stood at the edge of something they couldn't fix, carrying the guilt of survival. "I sometimes wonder if I'm doing right by Emma," Ethan admitted. "If I'm even capable of being enough for her." "You're there," Lucy said simply. "That's more than most. I'm not always present. I'm around, but I feel distant, detached. You're human, you're hurting, and you haven't had anyone to say that out loud to in a long time." He looked down, then back at her. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," she replied, her voice softer now. "But it doesn't have to be complicated to be true." They fell into silence again, the kind that didn't demand filling. After a long moment, Ethan stood, his hands in his pockets. "Thanks for not trying to fix anything." Lucy smiled faintly. "I don't think either of us needs fixing, just someone who listens." He hesitated in the doorway, glancing back at her. "You've changed this house, Lucy." She didn't answer. But long after he climbed the stairs, she sat there, staring at the spot where he'd been, heart unsteady but lighter somehow. Like maybe, for the first time in a long time, someone had seen past the careful quiet and stayed anyway. The days that followed settled into a kind of quiet rhythm, unspoken, tentative, but real. Ethan and Lucy didn't talk about that night on the couch, yet something had shifted. They moved around each other with a gentler awareness, and in the center of it all, Emma seemed to glow a little brighter. Then came the week of her birthday, a milestone, a reason to celebrate. And for the first time in years, Ethan found himself wanting not just to remember, but to be part of the moment. He just didn't expect that it would be the very thing to unsettle everything they had begun to build. The week of Emma's 5th birthday arrived with more anticipation than Ethan expected. She'd been counting down the days on a handmade calendar Lucy helped her create, drawing butterflies on each date as they passed. The closer the big day came, the more the house felt different, warmer, fuller, as if Emma's excitement had filled the empty corners that once held only shadows. Ethan had told Lucy he wanted the celebration to be simple, but at home. "I want her to remember this place as something more than just walls," he said. Lucy understood. She planned everything with care: soft colors, butterfly decorations, paper lanterns swaying gently in the hallway, cupcakes instead of a big cake. She even helped Emma design her own party dress with ribbons and a flower crown. On the day of the party, the apartment shimmered with the gentle chaos of joy. Laughter echoed from the living room, plates clinked, and Emma ran barefoot through the hallways, her wings bouncing on her back. Guests arrived slowly, classmates from preschool, a few friendly parents, Clara and her husband. Everyone kept things light, respectful. Ethan mingled in his quiet way, always keeping an eye on Emma. And then Lucy opened the door for someone Ethan didn't recognize. Daniel. He was tall, with warm eyes and a kind, relaxed manner. Lucy lit up when she saw him, one of those rare, effortless smiles that seemed to come from memory more than the moment. She hugged him tightly. "This is Daniel," she explained to Ethan when they crossed paths by the drink table. "We studied nursing together. He works ER shifts now." Ethan extended a hand, polite but distant. "Friend from college?" "Yeah, one of the good ones." Daniel handed Emma a gift, wrapped in newspaper and tied with yarn. She adored it immediately. Ethan watched as Daniel sat with her on the floor, helping her unwrap it, a handmade wooden puzzle shaped like a whale. Emma beamed. Lucy joined them, laughing at something Daniel whispered. Something shifted in Ethan's chest, tightened. He tried not to stare, tried to focus on conversations, refill drinks, be present, but every time he turned, he caught Lucy and Daniel smiling, remembering something only they understood. It wasn't just jealousy. It was the slow, sinking realization that Lucy had a life that didn't involve him, a history he wasn't part of, a version of her that existed before she ever stepped into this house. He told himself it didn't matter. But when he saw Lucy brush Daniel's arm as they laughed at an old joke, something inside him snapped quietly. He left the room, climbed the stairs, closed the door to his office. He didn't slam it, didn't rage, but the act of retreating felt familiar, automatic. He didn't know how to sit in that discomfort. So he ran from it. A few minutes later, Lucy knocked once and stepped inside without waiting. "You left," she said softly. "I needed a minute," he replied, not turning from the window. "You're upset." "I'm fine." She crossed her arms. "Is this because of Daniel?" Silence. "I've known him for more than a decade," she continued. "He's one of the few people in my life who stayed when things got hard. He's kind, loyal, but he's not why I'm here." Ethan finally turned to face her. "You looked different with him, lighter, like you belonged there in a way I'll never fully understand." Lucy took a deep breath. "I didn't come into this house to erase who I am, or who I was. I'm not starting from zero, Ethan, and I won't pretend to be someone you can build from scratch." His voice rose too harsh. "You make me feel like I'm standing on unsteady ground." "Maybe you are," she said gently, "but that's not my fault." He sat down on the edge of the desk, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't expect to feel this. I didn't expect to matter this much to you," she whispered. They sat in silence. Then she looked at him. Really looked. "You don't know how to let someone in without fearing they'll leave." He didn't deny it. "I'm not asking you to be ready," she added, "but I can't stay where I'm constantly doubted." She turned, walked toward the door, then paused. "I came here to care for Emma, but somewhere along the way, I started caring about this place, about you. And if that's something you can't face yet, that's okay, but I need to step back." And just like that, she was gone. The sound of her footsteps down the stairs felt louder than the music still playing below. And when Ethan looked out the window again, the city lights suddenly felt much farther away. The silence came back the moment Lucy walked out the door. It wasn't the usual kind Ethan had grown used to, the sterile quiet of polished floors and untouched furniture. This one was heavier. It settled differently, more personal. Like the absence of something that had just barely begun to feel like it belonged. Emma noticed first. The next morning, she wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, still in her butterfly pajamas. She climbed onto her usual stool, looked around, and asked softly, "Where's Lucy?" Ethan paused at the coffee maker. "She had to leave, sweetheart." Emma frowned. "But she didn't say goodbye." "I know." She didn't cry right away, but that night when Ethan tucked her in, she clutched the stuffed whale Lucy had given her for her birthday and whispered, "I don't want her to be gone." And then the tears came. Small broken sobs that had nothing to do with tantrums and everything to do with missing someone who mattered. Ethan sat by her bed long after she fell asleep, her little fingers still wrapped around his. He stared at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in a long while, completely helpless. The next few days dragged. He went back to his routines, early mornings, late nights, checking emails he didn't care about, attending meetings he didn't hear. But even inside that well-worn rhythm, something felt off. The rooms seemed colder, the light more distant. Even Emma, usually content with her crayons and cartoons, became quieter. She didn't hum at breakfast anymore. She didn't ask him to read. On the fourth day, Clara found him sitting in his office, staring at a family photo Emma had drawn months ago, 3 stick figures holding hands. "She keeps asking if Lucy's coming back," Clara said softly. Ethan didn't respond. Clara stepped closer, her voice firmer now. "You let something in, Ethan, for the first time in years, and now you're trying to shut it out like it never happened." He looked up at her, eyes tired. "You're suffocating the very thing that made you feel alive again." It wasn't an accusation, it was the truth. And it hit harder than he expected. Because Clara was right. Lucy hadn't just taken care of Emma, she had woken up something in Ethan, something he didn't know was still there, the capacity to feel, to hope, to want something beyond survival. And now, without her, he was right back where he started. Except now, he knew what it felt like to live. And that made the emptiness unbearable. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. Ethan had spent days going through the motions, dropping Emma at school, showing up for meetings, responding to emails without reading the content. But his thoughts always circled back to the same place, to the warmth Lucy brought, to the way she filled the space without trying, to the sound of Emma's laughter that only existed when Lucy was near. He couldn't take it anymore. At sunrise, without telling Clara or even Emma, he got in the car and drove. Through downtown, past the edge of the city, into a quieter neighborhood where sidewalks cracked beneath old trees and mailboxes leaned sideways. He didn't have an exact address. But he remembered Lucy mentioning a little house near a corner store with potted plants she couldn't keep alive and a squeaky front gate. When he saw the crooked wind chimes swaying outside a pale blue porch, he knew he'd found it. He hesitated at the bottom of the steps, and then the door opened. Lucy stood there, hair tied back in a loose braid, wearing a faded sweatshirt and soft confusion in her eyes. She looked both surprised and unsurprised to see him. "Ethan," she said, barely above a whisper. He took one step forward, then another. "I didn't come here because I panicked, or because I missed the quiet version of what we were," he said, voice steady. "I came because I chose to." Lucy didn't move. "I've been running from feeling anything for 5 years, but with you, I couldn't run fast enough. You caught up to me anyway." She swallowed hard, eyes searching his. "I'm not asking you to fix me," he continued, "and I don't want you to come back to care for Emma. I want you to come back to build something, with me, with her. Something real." A sound came from behind Lucy, a soft yawn. Emma stood barefoot in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching her stuffed whale to her chest. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Daddy?" He knelt instantly, arms open. She ran to him. "Can we go home now?" she asked into his shoulder. He looked up at Lucy. She stood there, lips trembling, tears shining but not falling. "If we go together," she said, her voice breaking, "then yes, we can go home." Ethan rose slowly, one arm holding Emma, the other reaching for Lucy's hand. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. She took his hand, and in that quiet, ordinary morning, under an overcast sky and the creak of wind chimes, they began again. Not as strangers, not as caretaker and employer, but as 3 people who had been broken and chose, despite it all, to rebuild. Together. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic speeches, just a quiet return. When Lucy and Emma walked back through the front door with Ethan, the apartment didn't look any different, but it felt like an entirely new place. The silence that once ruled every room had been softened, not erased, but transformed. It now held footsteps, conversation, the sound of life unfolding. They didn't talk about what came next in big, definitive terms. There were no promises of forever, no outlines of what it meant to start over. Instead, there were small things: sharing breakfast at the same table, learning how each other liked their coffee, letting Emma mix pancake batter while wearing a superhero cape. They took it day by day. Ethan learned to let go of control, little by little. He stopped checking his phone at dinner. He left his office door open more often. He listened, really listened, when Emma told stories that didn't have a point. And when Lucy laughed, he looked up from whatever he was doing just to watch her. Lucy in turn let herself settle, not as a visitor, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. She unpacked slowly, filled corners with life, a plant here, a recipe card there. She didn't need the space to be perfect. She just needed it to feel honest. Emma, for her part, stopped asking questions like how long will she stay and started drawing pictures with 3 smiling stick figures, always holding hands. One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light pooled across the kitchen, the 3 of them stood together, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and sharing quiet laughter. Emma sang a song she made up on the spot. Lucy corrected her lyrics with a smile. Ethan, half laughing, joined in, off-key. There was no orchestra playing in the background, no camera zooming in, just a father rediscovering presence, a daughter finally trusting joy, and a woman brave enough to stay. And in that moment, without needing to say it, they all knew. This, however imperfect, however unplanned, was home.